Thank you, Ian. Thank you, everyone. How are you doing today? All right. So how many of you were here yesterday for Fruit is Medicine? Okay, good number of folks. Okay, so a little bit different topic today. Throne of the Inner Temple. How many of you know what I'm referring to, Throne of the Inner Temple? What is the Throne of the Inner Temple? Anybody? The body. That's right, there's a quote that comes from it. So we're going to talk about the body and achieving optimal health in all aspects of life. So we're going to first start by talking a little bit about the purpose of health from a Baha'i perspective in the writings. We're going to talk about the causes of disease in the Baha'i writings and how that is theorized there. And then I'm going to introduce a concept I call the laws of health, which basically are derived from the spiritual laws that are in the teachings of Baha'u'llah. And I'm going to try to make some connections between that. We're going to do that and balance in all aspects of life, and then we're going to go through some quotations that are related to that. Sound good? Okay. So let's start with the quote where the throne of the inner temple comes from. It actually is from the writings of the Bab, and he says, "As this physical frame is the throne of the inner temple, whatever occurs to the former is felt by the latter. In reality, that which takes delight in joy or is saddened by pain is the inner temple of the body, otherwise known as the human soul, not the body itself. Since this physical body is throne whereon the inner temple is established, God hath ordained that the body be preserved to the extent possible, so that nothing that causeth repugnance may be experienced. The inner temple beholdeth its physical frame, which is its throne. Thus, if the latter is accorded respect, it is as if the former is the recipient. The converse is likewise true." So this sets up a relationship between the soul and the body, and why it's important from a Baha'i perspective to preserve and take care of our body, because the body is the throne of the inner temple, which is the soul. I was just speaking with the youth about identity and the forces of our time. And in that talk, we talked about all the different types of identity and ways of identifying yourself. We talked about your social status. We talked about gender. We talked about your race or ethnicity. We talked about your economic status. We talked about sexuality, all these issues, right? But the one identity that's the key one from a Baha'i perspective, all those identities that I mentioned all divide us, right? They all are points of separation. But there's one that unifies all. What identity is that? The spirit, right? The soul, the spiritual identity. And so this critically links the purpose of every kind of physical health or any endeavor you want to stay healthy is to basically, it's out of respect for the soul, the throne of the inner temple. Our body is a throne for our soul. Does that make sense? And it says very clearly that they both affect each other. So the state of the soul can affect the body, and the state of the body can affect the soul. So we want to avoid anything that causes repugnance to the body, and if we show respect for the body and take care of ourselves, we are showing respect for our soul, because we're all creation of God, and that soul is our fundamental identity. So the purpose of health, Shoghi Effendi writes, "You should not neglect your health, but consider it the means which enables you to serve." So this is a very critical quote. Basically, the purpose of health is to be able to serve the cause and to serve humanity. As Baha'is, we believe that service to humanity, Abdul Baha says, is service to God. So this service is the key part. If the body is like a horse, the Guardian says, which carries the personality and the spirit, and as such should be well cared for, so it can do its work. You should certainly safeguard your nerves and force yourself to take time, and not only for prayer and meditation, but for real rest and relaxation. The Guardian is advising us to actually take time for rest and relaxation. How many of you feel like you take time for rest and relaxation? Good. How many would like to do more? You think you can do better in terms of preserving your body for rest, right? I'll raise my hand too, right? In our crazy world, right, we can basically be gotten hold of 24 hours a day with those machines, right, the computers in our hands, right? Every moment is another distraction, a bing, a click, a thud, whatever sound you decided to add to your smartphone, right? And if you think about that, is that conducive to peace and tranquility, to rest and relaxation? It's a powerful tool, right? Science is valueless from a Baha'i perspective. It's what value we bring to it. But in order for us to really achieve this idea of prayer, meditation, rest, and relaxation that the Guardian enjoins upon us, I humbly would say that I think that we need to unplug. There's times when we need to disconnect and really be present in that moment. And there's other quotations that talk about the power of meditation, which we're going to talk about when we get to that law of health. But it's very powerful. So just to think about that, as food for thought in terms of how these devices can either be useful or they can actually keep us from achieving that rest and relaxation that we need. Another quote, this one from Abdu'l-Baha, that talks about the purpose of health. The body should be the servant of the soul, never its master, but it should be a willing, obedient, and efficient servant, and should be treated with the consideration which a good servant deserves. If it is not properly treated, disease and disaster result, with injurious consequences to master as well as servant. Again, emphasizing that connection between the soul and the throne of the inner temple, the body, and how we have to respect the body to be able to, and preserve it, to give respect to the soul. So very important, purpose of health. And this is the same quote. Okay. Another quote, looking after one's health is done with two intentions. Man may take good care of his body for the purpose of satisfying his personal wishes, Abdu'l-Baha says. Or he may look after his health with the good intention of serving humanity and of living long enough to perform his duty toward mankind. The latter is most commendable. So while it is important for us to take care of our bodies, just out of respect for the fact that there's the throne of the inner temple and it has an effect on our soul, the real purpose and the higher level that we need to call ourselves account to is to be able to serve, right? Not just to indulge ourselves in whatever selfish desire. Does that make sense? And when we pray for healing, and we pray, and it says in the writings for those who are physicians that we should invoke his name, Ya Baha'u'llah Pa, when we're seeing a patient. When we do that, we want to be able to help them fulfill their role and their destiny and their function and purpose in this life. And that's one way to think about it in terms of health. So now that we talked a little bit about the purpose of health, right? And we talked about it's really to serve and to be able to show respect to the body, which is the throne of the inner temple for the soul. Let's talk about the causes of disease. This is a quote that talks about equilibrium and balance. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I talked about it a little bit yesterday, which basically says that equilibrium and disproportionality, okay, is what causes disease. This idea of homeostasis I mentioned yesterday and balance. So this idea of homeostasis, from the cellular to the tissue to the system to the whole body, it also goes beyond that to the individual in a family, right, to the community. What are the three protagonists? The individual, right, the community, and the institutions. The plan of the Universal House of Justice actually fits with this concept of balance, right? Because there needs to be balance between the community, the individual, and the institutions. The things that happen, the parallel between the heart and the lungs and the kidneys, and the brain, they all have different functions and purposes. The same is also mirrored forth in our community life and in our community building activities. So think about that balance as not just narrow to just the physical body, but it's beyond that. It's mind, body, spirit, but it's also community. And that's where it really expands as Baha'is in terms of how we look at the world. Again, principal cause of disease is usually physical, Abdu'l-Baha says in some answered question. For the human body is composed of numerous elements, but in the measure of a special equilibrium. As long as this equilibrium is maintained, man is preserved from disease. But if balance, which is the pivot of constitution, it's the key for health, is disturbed, the constitution will be disordered and disease will supervene. So the WHO, World Health Organization, defines health as a state of complete mental, physical, and social well-being, and not just the absence of sickness or frailty. A lot of times in medicine, we look at disease as health as just the absence of disease. But it's really much more than that. As Baha'is, we believe that there's a purpose to it, to be able to serve humanity. And there's more components that we see also, because we don't believe the body is just the body. We believe the body is the throne of the inner temple, that there's a soul attached to it, and that's the connection point. A definition that I thought might make sense is also health is a dynamic state. It's not stagnant. Just like, for example, as Baha'is, we believe that spiritual development and the concept of heaven and hell are not stagnant places where you go to, right? They're levels of development and growth and closeness to God. You can think about, how many of you guys remember in math, an asymptote? You guys know like an asymptote? It's always coming down and approaching the x-axis, but it never actually touches the x-axis. It's just approaching infinity. That's one way I like to think about how it is in terms of our approach towards God. We're like an asymptote. As long as we're moving towards Him, we're never going to get there. But as long as we're moving toward Him and closer, we're getting to a more and more heavenly state, and we're getting to a more real state of health and balance, if we think about it, towards infinity, because there's infinite worlds of God. And so we think about that, and we think about this balance of all these different places. It's not one place. It's not like an event, like, okay, here we are, we had an event, it's over. It's a process. And that's the paradigm or worldview that the Baha'i revelation gives to us. So, again, this is kind of talking about balance between these things. I'm going to move forward. So let's go on to this concept of the laws of health. Abdu'l-Baha says that if humankind lived according to the natural inborn equilibrium without following wherever their passions led, it is undeniable that diseases would no longer take the ascendant nor diversify with such intensity. So, to me, this means there's something intrinsic to who we are and into our creation that's part of this balance. Remember this dynamic balance? It's not one place or event. It's this dynamic process that we need to tap into at the very core of our existence. And it's not just physical, it's mental, it's emotional, it's spiritual. And this quote about Baha'u'llah that says, nature in its essence is the embodiment of my name, the maker, the creator. Its manifestations are diversified by varying causes. And in this diversity, there are signs for men of discernment in the diversity of nature. Nature is God's will, and it is its expression in and through the contingent world. Nature is the expression of God's will through the contingent physical world. It is a dispensation of providence ordained by the ordainer. It's given to us as a bounty, and for men and women of discernment to be able to understand the diversity of its causes. How many of you remember the talks by Janab Adib Taherzadeh, where he talks about nature, he talks about love, he talks about the tree, right? What a beautiful talk, right? And when he talks about that, he says everything that we want to understand about ourselves, about our spiritual growth, is in nature. He says, look at a tree, how it's deeply rooted, on the one hand, into the ground, but yet it's growing and soaring into the heavens. And he says, what a beautiful analogy this is to explain our existence as human beings. We are rooted in the ground in this material life, in this physical life, but really our aspiration and our goal is to grow towards God, to the sky, towards spirit, right? And so it's very beautiful, and I think about that, and I think, well, this quote talks about there's so much to learn in nature. So when we talk about health, there must be lessons in nature, just like the laws of nature, right? That actually, if we tap into that inborn equilibrium that Abdu'l-Baha tells us, and we live according to those rhythms of life, then we will be able to achieve optimal health in all aspects of life. Does that make sense? So we learn from nature, and that helps because it's all part of the same creation from the same God. So nature is the greatest instructor for us. So if we think about it, think about the law of gravity, okay? Whether you accept or believe the law of gravity, it exists. And we're all governed by it. In order for us to truly be free of gravity, we actually have to accept it and completely understand it, and then we can quote-unquote defy it. We think we're defying it. How many of you took an airplane to come here to this conference, right? It looks like you're flying and you're defying gravity. But actually, for those who are physicists, right, and mechanical engineers, they actually have a very deep deep, deep knowledge of the fundamental root of what gravity is and all these calculations that are all based on the fundamental assumption of that equation of what gravity is, mathematically. It's a reality. And you're not actually defying it, you're actually using gravity, right, to be able to fly. So in a way, submitting to the law of gravity actually gives us freedom and true freedom. Just like submitting to the law of God gives us true freedom. You see how that kind of works together? I'm learning from nature. So in the same way, if there's laws of nature like gravity, like thermodynamics, matter can neither be created or destroyed, shouldn't there be laws that govern our spiritual and physical health as well? There are parallels. It's the same thing. I'm just talking about it differently. So that's what we're going to kind of spend the rest of the time talking about. Does that make sense? Okay. So one of the laws, again, this is just my humble opinion and understanding. So I really am excited to hear your feedback and questions and thoughts and reading the writings, and we all can come to a greater understanding. So one is this idea of law of magnetism in two natures. So let's think about this law of magnetism. How many of you are scientists that know like really well how a magnet works, right? Okay, you know how a magnet works. What's the key to a magnet? Like what's the key part of the magnet? Why does the magnet work? Right, so he said something very technical. He said it's the magnetic dipole that attracts to itself, that aligns itself and allows it. It's a dipole. It has a positive and a negative, right? Okay, so the magnet, and it aligns itself. So there's two things. There's two sides. There's a positive and a negative. And it structurally aligns itself. And when it's aligned, when the molecules are structurally aligned in a certain way, they exert a force of attraction. Let's think about that in relation to observing the laws of God. And Baha'u'llah talks about, observe my commandments for the love of my beauty. When we arrange our life around the standard of Baha'u'llah, around the standards of divine teachings, we exert a magnetic force of attracting the bounties and gifts from God. You see how that concept of magnetism in science actually applies to how we can live our lives and achieve balance? The two poles are what that we have inside us? What are the two poles? Material and spiritual, the higher and the lower nature. We have both of those in us as well, do we not? And we have to decide to find that balance and exert that source. We have to constantly be vigilant and allow the spiritual to be over the material. So that's the basic concept. The opposite poles. And so if we do this, we can attract health and happiness, versus if we're not aligned, we attract disease, right? So that's where the idea comes in. So we have to feed the good with positive emotions. You know, there's research and psychologists that talk about contentment, forgiveness, forgive for good. The idea that actually forgiving is healing. They've done studies that actually found forgiveness, and they've worked with people like in Northern Ireland and places where people are like really, people were killed, like family members were killed from each other, but actually forgiving. What does Abdu'l-Baha tell us about that? In some answered questions, he talks about punishment, right? As a society, if somebody commits a crime, the society should punish them as a deterrent, right? But the individual who is the victim, in your heart, you have to forgive. So powerful is that. You see that? And that actually is healing. You're actually achieving health and healing, and you're aligning yourself to get that magnetic force of attraction. So let's see some quotes that are connected to that. First of all, everything that we're talking about, I like this quote because it really captures why are we doing this. Again, health is for the purpose of serving humanity, serving the cause. And what we really need to do is we need to delve deeply, right? Baha'u'llah says, immerse yourselves in the ocean of my words. We need to independently investigate reality. We need to try to challenge and question, and so we can learn. Baha'u'llah says, true loss is for him whose days have been spent in utter ignorance of his self. Man should know his own self and recognize that which leadeth unto loftiness or lowliness, glory or abasement, wealth or poverty. We need to know about our nature, and we need to understand what things are healthy and what things are not healthy, both in terms of thinking, emotional states, activities, and how we can do that. So the two natures. So again, what I'm saying is from the writings. It's not from me. Abdu'l-Baha says, in man there are two natures, his spiritual or higher nature and his material or lower nature. In one he approaches God, and the other he lives for the world alone. Signs of both of these natures are to be found in man. In this material aspect, he expresses untruth, cruelty, and injustice. And we see a ton of that in the world because the lower nature is taking over so many people, right? All of these are the outcome of his lower nature. The attributes of his divine nature are showing forth love, mercy, kindness, truth, and justice, one and all being expressions of his higher nature. So that's basically the standard, right? Understanding these the two dipoles, the two right on the magnet. We have these two, and we know what one leads to our abasement, and the other one leads to our glory. So we have to recognize that in order to be able to achieve optimal health in all aspects of life. Every good habit, Abdu'l-Baha says, every noble quality belongs to man's spiritual nature, whereas all his imperfections and sinful actions are born of his material nature. So we are what we reflect. This law can also be the law of reflection, right? We talk about the mirror and the idea of reflecting. There's a quote about this as well. Man possesses two kinds of susceptibilities, the natural emotions, which are like dust upon the mirror, and spiritual susceptibilities, which are merciful and heavenly characteristics. There is a power which purifies the mirror from dust and transforms its reflection into intense brilliancy and radiance, so that spiritual susceptibilities may chasten the hearts and heavenly bestowals sanctify them. What is the dust which obscures the mirror? What is the dust? Abdu'l-Baha asked us. What is the dust? Materialism. What else? What is it? Ego, self, right? Selfishness, right? Ego. What is Abdu'l-Baha says? The moment that someone thinks they're a little bit superior or better than someone else is a very dangerous moment. And how many great servants have lost because of that ego? He said in the future the words I, me, my are going to be seen as bad words. And right now everything in social media is about selfies. And it's about a picture of myself and look at I'm doing this, look at I'm doing that. Why? What? Okay, you're eating. That's great. I'm eating too. What happened? What about taking a picture? I'm serving. I did something good for someone, right? Like a selfless, right? I don't know. It's a different way of thinking about it. Instead of a selfie, let's take a selfless. So take off the dust from the mirror, right? So reflection is key. You know, there's other quotes Abdu'l-Baha talks about that, is if we focus on the dust, we reflect the dust. We focus on the sun, we reflect the sun. So again, positive thinking is so critical, right, to achieving optimal health. So again, we are what we reflect. Talks, again, purify the mirror, radiant heart. Okay, I like this picture just because if you think about it, we can take all the different rays that come from us, right? You know, Abdu'l-Baha talks about how reality is one, right? And he says reality does not admit plurality. You know the colors of the rainbow, they're all different rays, different colors. But in reality, it's one ray. You divide it up in different colors, but it's just one ray of light. When you focus it, you can ignite a flame. When we align ourselves with the teachings, with our actions, we exert that magnetic force, and we can ignite a flame in our heart and in a flame of everyone else around us. And if we align ourselves with the plan of the Universal House of Justice, right? The talk that, I don't know how many of you saw Ken Bauer speaking a little bit about that. We talk about the issue of race. We talk about so many critical issues, but these core activities are like this magnifying lens. The core activities help to hone our energy in such a way as to ignite a flame that can totally transform us And it's a beautiful plan, if we think about it. So let's go on to another law, a law of mindfulness and belief. The word mindfulness is used a lot. I almost hesitated to use that, but I wanted to throw it out there. What does mindfulness mean to you? Anybody have any thought when you think about mindfulness? Yeah. Be present in the moment. Okay, that's a good one. What else? Yes. What's that? Be aware. Okay, an awareness, a presence in the moment. What else? Yes. Detachment from material self. Yeah. Yes. What's that? Not being judgmental, right? Being aware and be present and accepting. Being detached and accepting, right? These are all very strong spiritual qualities. They also have very strong impact on our health. So thoughts impact our health. I like to think about this as choose or lose your own adventure. How many of you remember those choose your adventure books? I don't know if anybody knows what I'm talking about. I used to read those choose your own adventure books. Like you can either do this or you can do that. And you turn to page 45 and it's like, oh, then you just fell in like a ditch and you died. And you're like, oh man, I made the wrong choice. But as long as we're alive, we have a choice, right? That's what the Baha'i teachings tells us, right? If we made negative choices, we made poor choices, if we were addicted to drugs, if we made certain things wrong, we're still alive, we have a choice to redeem ourselves, right? And Baha'u'llah says, noble have I created thee. Why dost thou abase thyself? So our thoughts are very powerful. And if we think very negatively of ourselves, right, as Baha'is, we don't think negatively. Humans shouldn't think negatively. How many of you are aware of the concept of like original sin, right? You've heard of that, right? This idea of guilt, right? That you just automatically like you're guilty, right? We don't have that in the Baha'i faith. Baha'u'llah says, noble have I created thee. Why dost thou abase thyself? He actually empowers us and basically says, instead of saying, oh, I didn't do the right thing, I was meant to do the wrong thing, I'm guilty, let me just, let's think about it like if you're trying to change your diet. Okay, let's go to food a little bit for those of you who like the food is medicine thing. Let's say you want to change your diet, but you have ice cream and you have like fast food and you feel really guilty and you feel bad about yourself. We've all been there, right? Or let's say you want to work out and you say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to work out. I'm going to do like an hour of this or an hour of that. Probably doesn't make sense to go too quickly, right? You got to take one step at a time. There's the story, I think I have it later on in here, but you're aware of the story when Abdul-Baha was asked, how can I achieve these high qualities of perfection of the standard of being a Baha'i, right? Give healing medicine to your enemies. Love your, people who are giving you poison. And Abdul-Baha's response was, kam kam ruz be ruz. Little by little, day by day. If you think about it, behavior change and taking charge of your health is the same thing. If I tell a patient that you need to exercise regularly and they come and they are not exercising regularly and they need to eat healthy, and they say, okay, I'm going to start exercising. And they say, okay, this next week I'm going to do 30 minutes a day. I'm going to do the treadmill. I'm going to do the elliptical. Then I'm going to go this, blah, blah. And then like they do something, they injure themselves, right? You're like, oh, or you get really tired and then you just can't follow up. And then you just say, give up, I can't do it. But if you say little by little, day by day, and you take one step at a time, and you feel empowered, and even when you fail, you say, hey, I'm just falling short of my own standard, right? It's not that I am intrinsically bad, like in not doing it. It actually makes a big difference. So positive thinking is very powerful. And this is a big piece of anxiety and depression. How many people are suffering from anxiety and depression? So many people. But the power of this that we have, and this law can help us overcome that. So let's talk about this. Abdul-Baha talks about joy, and it's so important to be happy and to have joy. Abdul-Baha says, joy gives us wings. In times of joy, our strength is more vital, our intellect keener, and our understanding less clouded. We seem better able to cope with the world and to find our sphere of usefulness. But when sadness visits us, we become weak. Our strength leaves us, our comprehension is dim, and our intelligence is veiled. The actualities of life seem to elude our grasp. The eyes of our spirits fail to discover the sacred mysteries, and we become even as dead things. How many of you have experienced that? We all experience that. Abdul-Baha says no one is without experiencing these things. And he says, you see all around you proofs of the inadequacy of material things. These are from Paris talks, by the way. How joy, comfort, peace, and consolation are not to be found in the transitory things of this world. All our sorrow, pain, shame, and grief are born in the world of matter. The ills, and it says, a man living with his thoughts in the kingdom knows only perpetual joy. The ills all flesh is heir to pass him not by. In other words, you're not like immune to it. You're going to still suffer. But they only touch the surface of his lives. The depths are serene and calm. And then he gives the example of himself being in prison for 40 years. And he says, every night infinite joy was mine. And he said, not one night would I be able to last if I didn't have my thoughts in the kingdom. So you think about it, he says, and then he says, why are we not turning to this heavenly consolation? It's there for us. And when we engage our friends and family members in this community building process with these core activities, we're not saying, oh, you have to become a believer to be able to engage in this power. We're saying we're here to help embrace all of us and grow this spirit and this community. And we want to spread the joy, right? No matter what. Whether they become a believer or don't become a believer, they're engaging in the revelation of Baha'u'llah. Does that make sense? So, more quotes about joy. He says, there's no human being untouched by the influences of grief and sorrow. Joy is our strength. And we talk about that. So, how many of you guys have read In Search of Meaning by Viktor Frankl? Yeah, very powerful book. What are your thoughts about that? How does that relate to what we're talking about? Anybody? Yeah.
In the most difficult of circumstances in a Nazi concentration camp, he still recognized that he was in charge of his own spirit, I guess you could say, that he chose to view it in a different way, to continue to be joyful.
So Viktor Frankl was in concentration camps, right? And he was one of the Jews during World War II, was in the concentration camps, and he wrote a book called In Search of Meaning. And he actually was a psychiatrist. And many people talk of him as the fourth school of Viennese psychiatry. So you talk about Freud, everybody talks about that. So in Freud said that basically we have to go to the past. The main search that we have as human beings is the search for pleasure. And as long as we're able to satisfy that need for pleasure, we're okay. And we need to go backwards and try to debrief and disconnect that. And I'm not going to go through the other schools. Yeah, you have a comment. What's that? It's cold in here. Okay, I have no control over that, but if anyone can hear, you're asking for the cold to be removed so that we can be warmed. We're trying to be warmed by the Word of God and the concepts, but let's try to maybe get a little bit more help mechanically from the air conditioning system. Thank you for saying that. So, thinking about this idea of the search for pleasure versus the search for meaning, okay? So, Viktor Frankl said that the real search, the real thing that defines us as human beings is the search for purpose and meaning in life. And even in the setting of a concentration camp, where it's like the worst setting you can possibly think of. You put numbers on you, you have your person next to you, they're gassed, they're put to death, you're completely dehumanized. He found that the people that survived that experience had a sense of purpose and vision and meaning of what the future could be. And then he developed a whole school of psychotherapy called logotherapy. I encourage you to read about it. It's very Baha'i in its philosophy. He basically says the way we should help people treat anxiety, depression, or any kind of mental illness is to help them find purpose and what's purposeful and meaningful to them in their life. Like someone says, my purpose is I want to spend time with my grandchildren. Or my purpose is like I want to be able to listen to my music or whatever, right? And you develop on that. And it's forward thinking instead of past thinking. Very Baha'i in philosophy. And very much in line with this idea of Abdul-Baha's positive psychology, right? That perception becomes reality. And that can health. Does that make sense? So, emotions impact our health. Matters relating to man's spirit have a great effect on the body's condition. Baha'u'llah says, jealousy consumeth the body, and anger doth burn the liver. Avoid these two as you would a lion. That's very strong words. So actually, in traditional Chinese medicine, they have something called liver stagnation, and they basically say that it comes from anger. In Chinese medicine, they actually say that anger is what causes this burning of the liver, which is really, really interesting. You think about it, that's that concept. So there may be like a physical connection to that. But these things affect it. So we all know that emotions have a big impact on our health. How we think about it, right? How we feel. So for example, they've done studies with people who are heart attack survivors or stroke survivors, and they found that independently of controlling their cholesterol level, their blood pressure level, just treating depression and their mental health resulted in 68% fewer deaths and better outcomes. That's huge. Mental health is very critical, and it's something that's not realized. And I would argue that one of the reasons why we have a mental health crisis, and when I talk about the topic of this talk, optimal health in all aspects of life, mental health is a critical piece of that. If we do not address that, right, through changing that perception to empowering us, then we can't achieve health. And really, it comes down to a lack of spirituality, a lack of recognizing our essence as spiritual beings and drawing from the power that comes from that. So meditation. Meditation is a really powerful tool. How many of you meditate when you say prayers? What kind of meditation do people do? Anybody? Yes. You just sit and breathe. Beautiful. Very simple yet elegant. Yes, please speak up loud. What is that? Mindfulness body scan, where you take inventory of every aspect of your body and you go through it. Beautiful. What else? Yes. You what? Uh-huh. So she says she reads a quote from Baha'u'llah, and then she sits and meditates on it, and then she gets back to herself. Right? We're advised to pray, yes, and meditate. What's that? Repeating verses. Thy name is my healing, thy name is my healing, like a mantra. So the mantra concept, right? You're familiar with the mantra concept. So do we have one preferred form of meditation in the Baha'i faith? No. We're free. Well, yeah, we have to say our Allahu Akbar 95 times. Yes, that's true. But we don't have one particular type, right? We're free to choose from the whole world, transcendental meditation, mindfulness, right? Whatever you want, but you use the core inspiration of the Holy Word, right? So what does Shoghi Effendi say about meditation? Through meditation, doors of deeper knowledge and inspiration may be opened. So you might think that I can't lose weight, or I can't eat healthy, I can't improve my sleep, I can't improve my blood pressure, but if you reflect and you meditate and you pray, the answer will come to you. It's something powerful. Just think about the connection between our lifestyle choices and our health, and when we pray and meditate. A deeper knowledge and inspiration may be open. Naturally, if one meditates as a Baha'i, he is concerned with the source. Meditation is very important, and the guardian sees no reason why the friend should not be taught to meditate, but they should guard against superstitions or foolish ideas creeping into it. So he says, look, you don't want to just get into rituals, where the rituals without meaning, because we don't believe in rituals for their own sake, right? The essence of it is the core and the meaning of why we do it. Another quote, as to meditation, this also is a field in which the individual is free, as I said. There are no set forms of meditation prescribed in the teachings, no plan as such for inner development. The friends are urged, nay enjoined, to pray, and they also should meditate. But the manner of doing the latter, the meditation, is left entirely to the individual. That's beautiful. Look at how empowering this faith is. It's so great, right? Isn't it beautiful? Don't you want to go and share it with everybody? Yeah. That's why we're here, right? Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about some mind-body practices. So these are forms of meditation that have been around for thousands of years, and they actually are very powerful. So yoga, how many people do yoga? Okay. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, right, in this country, probably not many people did yoga. They thought it was like a fringe thing or something from the East. It's like those religions from the East. Well, pretty much all the religions come from the East, but that's a different issue. You know, yoga is a mind-body therapy. And by mind-body, I mean it invokes the connection between the body and the mind. You guys have heard about the placebo effect? What's the placebo effect? What's that? Okay, I'm hearing a lot of muttering. I can't hear it. It's that really cold air conditioning. What? What is that? Sugar pills. Okay, yeah. So over 100 years ago in this country, when we didn't know how to treat infectious disease and we didn't have anything to treat it, right? Doctors actually gave sugar pills. It was very common medical practice. And they found that the sugar pills helped a lot. And actually people healed. Right now it's illegal for me to give you a sugar pill. Even though it can really help you potentially, right? If I tell you do this and like, you know. And in fact, actually the only time, there's a quote that Abdul-Baha has, he says, the only time it's okay and acceptable to lie and not tell the truth is a physician telling a patient that he has hope for a given remedy or treatment will actually be effective. That's the only time that we're allowed to lie. So physicians are able to lie only in those circumstances. That's kind of interesting. Okay. So it's kind of a neat quote to think about. But you think about it, if you guys have seen a physician, sometimes you've seen them, we're so focused on like the stats and the data, and we have to, and the liability, the medical liability, right? And the issues, I have to give you all the percentage, okay? If we do this, there's a 30% chance that you could die, there's a 20% chance you could be brain dead, there's like a 10% chance that you're just gonna like not see anything anymore. I mean, it's like, well, thanks a lot. Like, what about like, is there any hope for me? I don't know. After that, I walk away and like, I mean, we're not using the power of belief. There's no like hope, right? There's nothing. So, but it's beautiful that Abdul-Baha actually says, gives permission, right? In certain cultures, like in parts of Japan, for example, if someone has a terminal or life-threatening diagnosis like cancer, they actually never tell the patient. They tell the family. And then the family just like goes around because they believe that that could also like just cause them to die. And very interesting. We think about that. So the power of belief. So going back to the placebo effect, across the board for every therapy, every surgery, every medication, anything that you can possibly think about, 30% of the time on average, the placebo works exactly the way you want the therapy to work. In other words, 30% of the time, the torn ligament heals. 30% of the time, the blood pressure goes down. 30% of the time, the artery opens up. 30% of the time, these things totally miraculously take care of themselves, on average. If you could actually take something and find a pill that 30% of the time for anything, you give it to the people and 30% you're gonna be okay no matter what, that's amazing. Mind-body therapies invoke that connection with the mind and the body so that you can actually have the power of the mind affect your health. That's why yoga and Tai Chi and other these things have been shown to be effective. So for example, yoga, the other thing about these things in meditation, these are all very cost effective. Remember some of you were there yesterday, I talked about the costs of medication, the cost of healthcare. It's 18% of GDP right now in the US. It's so costly, and so there are many side effects potential, right? For medications being, you know, adverse effects of medication being fourth leading cause of death. Right? We want to find something else. If I recommend for you to do yoga and I can actually help treat your anxiety with that and depression with that, why am I going to give you a pill? The commercial, the guy shows very happy and said, side effects may include wanting to kill yourself. You know, it's like, wait a second, buddy. Hold on, right? Or they have the commercial for the Celebrex and they say side effects include heart failure and in rare circumstances, death. And right? And you're like, what the heck is going on, right? You see a group of people, and you know they do it in a beautiful setting, right? This direct-to-consumer advertising takes advantage of the placebo effect. Because they know that you think about it, then you go to your doctor and be like, ask your doctor about AstraZeneca today. You know, he'll come and tell you. You plant the seed in the head and they're like, I can imagine it right now. I see the field of people doing Tai Chi and they're like very happy and healthy. If I take this pill, then I will be happy and healthy. They're using that power. You know, it was illegal 15, 20 years ago to actually do direct-to-consumer advertising in the US. I believe it's still illegal in Canada. Anybody, is that true? It is still illegal in Canada, right? Hopefully it still is. But they're using that and it gets in your mind. And so then you think that's actually, instead we should just say, do yoga. So here it is. So yoga has increased from 2002 to 2012, twice as many practicing yoga. 9.5% of Americans practice yoga. It's been shown to reduce anxiety, stress, depression, improve sleep. It's been used to treat addiction, increase muscle strength and balance and flexibility, and overall quality of life. Just yoga. That's a pretty powerful pill if it was a medication. What about Tai Chi? Anybody practice Tai Chi? Anyone's done Tai Chi? Yeah, so Tai Chi's been around for a long time as well. I'm just going to take a look at the time to make sure we're okay. We have until what? What do we have until? 4:45, okay. Tai Chi, 2.5 million Americans do it. Actually, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, based on the evidence, they recommend Tai Chi for the elderly for fall prevention. It's one of the only activities that they say, they've compared Tai Chi to just walking and other exercises, other strength building exercises in the elderly, and they found Tai Chi to be better in terms of fall prevention. Right? Very amazing. And we think about, so Tai Chi has also been shown to improve outcomes in coronary artery disease, metabolic syndrome, back pain, fatigue, chronic fatigue syndrome, stroke, rehabilitation, pain syndromes, and osteoporosis. So if you think about some of these mind-body therapies, and other complementary therapies like breathing techniques, right? They're amenable to self-care, right? In other words, I could show you how to do a breathing technique right now and you could do it, right? They're cost-effective. It doesn't really cost anything, right? And it has minimal to no side effects. So to me, even as a scientist, I think to myself, the more potential for a given therapy has to do harm, the higher the risk for that therapy, the more we should call it to a higher standard of evidence before we do it. Right? How many surgeons do we have in the room? How much of surgical procedures are based on randomized controlled trials? Is there a percentage there? Is everything that we do surgically a randomized controlled trials backed up? What's that? It's quite high. You've done a lot of randomized controlled trials, in other words. You have. That's great. Okay, what else? How about other surgeons? Oh, I'm sorry. He said in my specialty with OB/GYN, C-sections, there's a lot of evidence that supports them through randomized controlled trials. Right? Yes. That's very good. What else? Yes. Go ahead. There's not what? Go ahead, tell us.
Unfortunately, not too many. Not too many. I agree with you. Yes. Neurotology, head and neck surgery. Neurotology, yeah.
These surgeries are life-saving, and they're critical, and we need surgery. So people get excited about food as medicine, but you should be excited about surgery because it actually saves many people's lives. My point, though, is, as you said, agree, a lot of these procedures are not necessarily based on the same standard of randomized controlled trial. In other words, we don't have that. We do it empirically, right? It's an art a little bit, right? But it's actually a very highly skilled art. It takes years to do it. The ENT and the super ENT, I mean, so many different years to do that. I have a good friend, Ashkan Monfared, who did that at Stanford. You probably know. Wonderful guy. But what's interesting is, even if in those procedures, right, where all of those procedures are invasive and you can have the risk of death, right, but they're life-saving, you need to do them. In those cases, not all of them have a randomized controlled trial, and there may be many that don't, right, but they're still effective and they're life-saving, you have to do it. What about a simple breathing technique? that has no potential really for side effect, yet someone will wave their hands and say, there's no evidence to support that, so I'm not going to recommend it until I have the definitive trial. So my only point is to say, if it's very minimally invasive, perhaps we should think about saying, okay, try the breathing technique. Don't ignore the medication, don't ignore the surgery, but try the breathing technique too. Because we don't need to wait to get the definitive randomized control trial. Does that make sense? That's the only point. Any questions or thoughts about that? I don't mean to be too controversial. At least you can get the 30% placebo effect from it. You're right. You're right. So even if it doesn't do anything else, if it doesn't do any potential for harm, at least you get the placebo effect from it. So there you go. So 30% of the time it will be. Okay, good. So we'll move on to another law. Law of personal responsibility, or the spiritual law of true freedom. So this concept is basically idea of basically understanding our free will and what that means and taking personal responsibility. I was just speaking to the youth before this, and a lot of them were age 15. And so we talked about what does it mean to be age 15. A lot of them already knew. They said, I asked them, what does it mean? And they said, it means to be spiritually responsible for my own actions. And another person says, until now my parents were responsible, but now I'm responsible. Very great insight from the youth, right? This idea is true because we have responsibility. So in other words, we are really responsible for both our success and our failure, right? And this is very true in terms of the writings. We're responsible also for our own garden. I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means. Am I responsible to make sure that your garden is okay? No, I'm not. I can't do it. You're doing a good job. He's putting some lotion on. I'm not responsible. He's taking care of his garden. He's taking care of the throne of his inner temple right here. You see that? The cold air from the air conditioning didn't abate. His hands are dry. He's putting in the lotion. Let's give him a hand for that. That's really amazing. Well done. Excellent. And he's open to sharing too. Oh, now you took it to the next level. Serving others. You did it all right there. That's the whole talk. It's it. We're done. Okay. So the whole idea is that you have that response. I can't come and tell you, you do need to do this. I have to tell myself. I only have time to take care of myself. And if you do that, then you can achieve optimal health. The disease of our time, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, it comes back to our actions because of the lifestyle choices that we make. So this quote is a beautiful quote from Baha'u'llah. I will read it because I think it's very powerful, even though it's a little lengthy. And it comes from another quote. It says, "It follows, therefore, that every man hath been and will continue to be able of himself to appreciate the beauty of God the glorified. Had he not been endowed with such a capacity, how could he be called to account for his failure? If in the day when all the peoples of the earth will be gathered together, any man should, while standing in the presence of God, be asked, 'Wherefore hast thou disbelieved in my beauty and turned away from myself?' And if such a man should reply and say, 'Inasmuch as all men have erred, and none hath been found willing to turn his face to the truth, I too, following their example, have grievously failed to recognize the beauty of the eternal,' such a plea will assuredly be rejected. For the faith of no man can be conditioned by anyone except himself." How many have read that before? Okay. It's a very powerful quote, but I really think it shows responsibility rests right here. Independent investigation of truth, independent, we have that free will, right? O son of being, bring thyself to account each day ere thou art summoned to a reckoning, for death unheralded shall come upon thee, and thou shalt be called to give account of thy deeds. Let's connect this to achieving optimal health in all aspects of life. Checkpoints. How well did I do in terms of treating my throne of my inner temple today? Did I eat well? Did I sleep enough? Did I think positive thoughts? Did I use this temple to serve other human beings? Did I do an act of service? We need to check in. If we don't check in about those things, again, the spiritually development, but also physically. I want to lose weight. I want to be healthy. I want to control my blood pressure. Am I checking in with myself every day to see whether or not I'm doing it? The things that I said that I need to do to get there? Am I doing kam ruz beruz? Am I doing little by little, day by day? You see how it all parallels itself? It's not different. Reality does not admit plurality. It's one, Abdu'l-Baha says. It's one. The physical and the spiritual, all together. And there's no room for finding fault or excuses for other people. This is the most, I really think these are some of the most important. They're all important, but so critical. O son of being, how couldst thou forget thine own faults and busy thyself with the faults of others? Whoso doeth this is accursed of me. Backbiting is comparable to murder. This is the standard of Baha. It's so critical. We can't waste our time finding fault with others. We have to keep working on our own. And our actions are our free will. So in all action or inaction of man, Abdu'l-Baha says, he receives power from the help of God. But the choice of good or evil belongs to man himself. So we have the power, but we have the choice of what we do with it. Everything comes down to our choice. And this is a longer quote. I'm not going to read all of it. But it basically says, he talks about free will. Some Answered Questions is wonderful, by the way. If you haven't read it recently, it's that, and Paris Talks is something I like to reread like once a year, because it's just so many different philosophical questions. He says, but in the choice, he says, this part's good to read. It is evident and clear that these actions are for the most part left to the will of man. But there are certain things to which man is forced and compelled, such as sleep, death, sickness, decline of power, injuries, and misfortunes. These are not subject to the will of man, and he is not responsible for them, for he is compelled to endure them. But in the choice of good and bad actions, he is free, and he commits them according to his own will. For example, if he wishes, he can pass his time in praising God, or he can be occupied with other thoughts. He can be enkindled light through the fire of the love of God, a philanthropist to the loving world, or he can be a hater of mankind. So it's up to us through our deeds, through our actions. So I'm going to try to wrap up here so we can have some time for questions, because I know we have just a few minutes left for questions, till 45 after. This one I'm not going to talk too much about, but the law of real food and sustenance is the fact that we need to eat real food, and there's a food instinct. Okay? So I gave a talk about this. And that real food has to come from the earth. And connecting with this enables us to achieve optimal health. I would add also that it's not just like what you eat, but also how you eat it, and in what spirit you're eating it, right? So that's very important. Think about that. I'm going to skip through this because I've talked about this already. The main thing is this idea of the food instinct. And the idea is that Abdu'l-Baha says that in nature, animals are able to find the right food without any knowledge of pharmacology or what's healthy, what's a poisonous plant, what's not a poisonous plant, because they have a food instinct. We're also part of the animal kingdom. He says in that way, we need to get in touch with that instinct so that we can understand that when there's imbalance and when there's disease, what do we need to eat? Again, what Baha'u'llah says, man should know what leads to our glory and what leads to our abasement. What's the knowledge of our true self? Our true self is our spiritual identity. Our spiritual identity is expressed and developed through the power of the Word of God, and it's not just about me, I, and my own things. It's about the whole community. It's about the individual, it's about the community, it's about the institutions, and it's about the divine plan that the Universal House of Justice has laid down for us. Law of connectedness and community. Connecting with others and forgetting ourselves is the key to health. I can't emphasize this one enough. How wonderful is the Institute process and what we have. It's the core activities, not the sole activities, but it's the core. Think about it as a hub on a wheel. Here's the core activities in the middle, and then we have other things around it. We have firesides, we have deepenings, we have other activities that we do, but this is the core of it. It's the pivot around where everything else comes from. And it's something that a Baha'i from here to Africa to anywhere can connect to. It's amazing and it's transformative. Connections are powerful. There was a Harvard study that looked at men for over 30 years. And there's a cool YouTube video about this. And they looked at all the different things of health, like what were all the risk factors and diseases, and they wanted to, what caused some people to live longer and healthier. And what was the single thing that they found? What was it? Connections. Meaningful, authentic relationships. Authentic relationships. Meaningful, authentic relationships. So it wasn't just if somebody was married or not married, but for that to be a meaningful, authentic relationship. To have that relationship over time. That was independent of any physical, right? Their high blood pressure, if they had a disease, that was the single one factor that was connected with longevity and health over 30 years. And happiness, exactly. And happiness, which is, joy gives us wings. Happiness empowers us. Without happiness, we can't do anything. So the Baha'i faith is really about developing those meaningful, authentic relationships. And the community building process of the core activities are the tools where we can do that. And that's where health can come. Not only for individuals, but communities. Does that make sense? Connecting it together. Service to humanity, service to God. So powerful is the idea of unity that it can envelop the whole earth. Healing through service. Shoghi Effendi says, this is a beautiful quote. The more we search for ourselves, the less likely we are to find ourselves. And the more we search for God and to serve our fellow men, the more profoundly will we become acquainted with ourselves, and the more inwardly assured. This is one of the great spiritual laws of life. One of these laws of life. He just said it for us right there. Beautiful. I'm gonna run out of time. So there's one more here, law of growth and suffering. You guys know about suffering, but we don't believe in asceticism, right? We don't believe in saying, I'm gonna wear a hair shirt and I'm gonna beat myself a few times with a chain, and then if I do that, I'm gonna grow spiritually, right? We don't believe that. There's a few people who do that in different groups and cultures, but we don't do that. We believe in joy and happiness, right? But if you think about it, this idea of the journey, I talked about this a little bit before. Health is a journey, it's a process. Achieving health is not something that I achieve one day and I'm done. It's not like a checklist, I just check it off. It's bringing myself to account each day. See, the Baha'i Writings have the answer for everything. That's the secret to health right there. It's checking in every day. And it's like a chemical reaction, right? You guys know in chemistry there's endothermic and exothermic reactions. Sometimes you got to put some energy in, sometimes the system releases energy, but always it's transitional state, right? Where it's like, oh, I don't know, am I going to go from this form to another? And this is change, right? We hear the plans from the Universal House of Justice, the letters talk about crisis and victory. That's how the body works too. It goes from one side to it's crisis and victory. It's from the individual as well. And if we give that energy into it, then we can grow the system. So suffering in the path of God, not suffering for its own sake. We don't believe in asceticism. There's no problem with material goods. The problem is being attached to them. Case in point, March 1st, March 2nd letter from the Universal House of Justice. Really, that says it all. Life is challenging. If adversity befall thee not in my path, how canst thou walk in the ways of them that are content with my pleasure? If trials afflict thee not in thy longing to meet me, how wilt thou attain the light in thy love for my beauty? We're not going to get health like this, like with the snap of my finger, right? It's going to take time. It's going to take effort. It's a process. But as long as we stay true and we focus, we'll achieve that, and we'll achieve a different level of it. I'm going to go to this one here. Man's existence, physical existence on this earth, is a period during which the moral exercise of his free will is tried and tested in order to prepare his soul for the other worlds of God. That may be through physical illness, through mental illness, through things that happen in our life, but we must welcome affliction and tribulations as opportunities for improvement in our eternal selves. That's how we have to look at the challenges in life. And if we look at it that way, then everything can be beautiful and transformative. And then we can till our own garden, and we can provide beautiful fruits. So I'm going to keep moving here. Contentment is so critical. Baha'u'llah says contentment is so critical. Verily, the most necessary thing is contentment under all circumstances. By this, one is preserved from morbid conditions and from lassitude. Yield not to grief and sorrow. They cause the greatest misery. So important to be happy and to be content. I think yesterday I remind us of the hidden word. It says, O quintessence of passion, put away all covetousness and seek contentment. For the covetous hath ever been deprived, and the content hath ever been loved and praised. And you think about that, even in health and disease, you have to be content with where you are first to be able to move on to the next plane, because you have to have a stable footing, a foundation. Now, some random quotes, just to wrap it up. Breastfeeding. In the writings, it talks about mother's milk as being the best thing since sliced bread, right? It is. The research on breastfeeding stands above all else. It's good for the mother, it's good for the child. I can go off on this, but this is a beautiful quote. Talks about this. It's really much better. He said this a long time ago, and then we had the period of time when everybody was formula fed and everybody was marketed formula, but this was in our writings. Sleep. This one is a big one. We don't get enough sleep. This is a bad, tough one, right? So important. The Guardian said, regarding your question, there are very few people who can get along without 8 hours sleep. If you're not one of those, you should protect your health by sleeping enough. The Guardian himself finds that it impairs his working capacity if he does not try and get a minimum of 7 or 8 hours. So, there you go. I'm not going to speak for that because we all have to work on that one. Laughter. I'm glad you're laughing. Laugh and talk. Okay, that was a little silly. Don't lament and talk. Laugh and speak. Laughter is caused by the slackening or relaxation of the nerves. It is ideal condition and it is not physical. Laughter is the visible effect of the invisible. For example, happiness and misery are supersensuous phenomena. One cannot hear them with his ears or touch them with his hands. Happiness is a spiritual state. This is our beloved Abdul-Baha. Happiness, this is the day of happiness. And I want to end with these quotes on happiness. In no time of any manifestation was there the cause of happiness as now. A happy state brings special blessings. When the mind is depressed, the blessings are not received. Break that cycle, be happy. Happiness has a connection with health, preservation, and from sorrow, diseases are born. So you have to, it's right there. Happiness has a connection with health preservation, and from sorrow, diseases are born. In a large measure, happiness keeps our health, while depression of spirit begets disease. We should all visit the sick when they are in sorrow or suffering. It is a real help and benefit to have a friend come. Happiness is a great healer to all those who are ill. And let's see, well, let me go back here. One more, and then I'm going to be done. I just want to read this last one, because it's a good one. They're all good, but you know, whoops. Let me get to the very end. Sorry. I'm going to wrap it up here. Okay. Anybody can be happy in the state of comfort, ease, health, success, pleasure, and joy. But if one will be happy and contented in the time of trouble, hardship, and prevailing disease, it is the proof of nobility. It is the proof of our noble nature. Baha'u'llah says, noble have I created thee. Thanks be to God that the dear servant of God is extremely patient under the disastrous circumstances, and the place of complaining gives thanks. So I'm going to thank you for listening to me and being here with me today. Thank you.